What's going on, analysts? We've got a real treat for you today. We're interviewing someone who knows an awful lot about the geography of crime, Dr. Spencer Chainey from the UK. He's releasing a new book, and we can't wait to get our hands on it. So let's go ahead and get started. We're doing things a little differently today. Sitting in for me in London, England, to conduct the interview is Rachel Carson. You might remember her from episode 2 earlier on this summer. You can click up here to watch that interview. Rachel will be conducting interviews of our featured European guests, and we welcome her back to the channel.
What's going on, analysts? Welcome to the All About Analysis YouTube channel, European edition. Today's guest is Dr. Spencer Chainey. Is it okay if we call you Spencer?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Spencer is an associate professor at University College London's Jill Dando Institute, the JDI. He's also director of the JDI Latin America and Caribbean unit and director of continuing professional development. Spencer has over 20 years of experience working with police and public safety agencies across the world. He works very much at the interface between academic research and the practical world of policing, and is heavily involved in the education of current and future generations of practitioners and researchers. His work is much published and includes the UK's guide and practice advice on information sharing for community safety, the US National Institute of Justice booklet, Understanding Hotspots, and his definitive book on GIS and crime mapping, co-authored with Jerry Ratcliffe. Spencer's latest book, Understanding Crime, Analysing the Geography of Crime, is much anticipated and soon to be released. Thank you so much for joining us today, Spencer. We are honoured to have you join us today, and welcome to the channel.
My pleasure, Rachel. Nice to see you.
Likewise, you too. Now, I'm aware that much of your recent work is focused on developing research on crime and citizen security in Latin America and the Caribbean. What can you tell us about your current projects and activities in this region?
Oh, there are many. Let me think. So there's a whole load of work that we've been doing on hotspot policing in the Latin America region in particular, more so than the Caribbean. This kind of began in 2016 with the introduction of a large-scale hotspot policing program in Montevideo, Uruguay, which has been the longest running and largest hotspot policing program in the world. And I've been involved in several evaluations of the hotspot policing program. I make regular visits to Montevideo, and that has often involved going out with the police, going out on patrol with them, seeing how they go about patrolling their hotspots. And we've also done two kind of attitude surveys of the police officers who are involved in this, in hotspot policing. Yeah. Every single day, there's over 500 police officers dedicated to this hotspot policing program. And we did a survey last year and the year before, which aimed to capture their experiences on the whole thing. So that's, and what the program in Uruguay did was that interest then from the neighboring countries, in particular Argentina and Brazil, has led to us being involved in developing hotspot policing programs in those countries. We've already implemented a pilot hotspot policing program in 4 cities in Argentina in 2017. That then led to the expansion of that program to over 30 different cities in Argentina. And this year, at the beginning of the year, we were about to introduce a new hotspot policing program, or several programs in Brazil, but then that all got curtailed with the pandemic. We were about to introduce those in March and April, but they have been held back until things turn back to normal. A lot of that work on hotspot policing and our research work on evaluating those has kind of like stemmed from a whole other kind of section of research, which is involved us looking at crime concentration patterns. One of the things that I would hear time and time again from Latin American and Caribbean police officers, particularly in Latin American cities, would be that, these things may work in London or New York or Chicago or wherever, but where we are, it's different. Our crime is different. Our crime is special. As a police officer once said to me in Rio de Janeiro, and I was like, I don't believe you. Yes, you may have higher levels of violence, but fundamentally, the criminal behavior behind them, the spatial patterns that we have observed, will be similar. And so we embarked on a whole series of research which examined concentrations of crime, of all different types of crime, particularly though with street crime, street robbery, and showed that the patterns that we see in other parts of the world outside of Latin America, we see in Latin American cities. In fact, places in Brazil and other parts of Latin America were a little bit special because their crime was even more concentrated than we had seen in London, New York, Chicago, other cities, which lends more to programs like hotspot policing having a chance of working. The more concentrated your crime, the more compact and concentrated your crime, the more likely a program like a hotspot policing intervention targeted to those places is more likely to work. That research on crime concentration, we then extended to then look at homicide concentration. Now, there's not many parts of the world where you can actually map hotspots of homicide than in Latin America. And we just published a study this week, where are we now in December, this week in the Police Journal, looks at homicide concentration patterns in 4 cities in the state of Rio de Janeiro. Because in a city like Rio de Janeiro, you have about 1,500, 2,000 homicides per year in a city of about 6 million. So you can map concentrations, which we have done, these hotspots of homicide. And then what we've been doing also with that research on homicide, because homicide is a major thing in Latin America. What is it? 8% of the world's population, a third of all the homicide that happens in the world happens in Latin America. So homicide is a major problem. So we've been doing other research on homicide. We've looked at what we call retaliatory homicide. By looking at it, some of the listeners may be familiar with near-repeat victimization patterns, and we've applied those principles to looking at retaliatory homicides, homicides that are kind of repercussions of previous incidents. We are looking at the moment at how you have a big problem, particularly in Brazil, with police killing of citizens. More so than any other part of the world. And in Rio de Janeiro, the police go into favelas and shoot people as a way to try to control the violence. And we're looking at that using near-repeat patterning principles as well to see, do the police killings come after an incident, or does the police go in and kill someone, then lead to other violence that happens afterwards? And we're extending all this homicide research out further by looking at homicide not only in relation to what I call the traditional structural causes of crime, like social inequality, poverty, to explain why homicide is so high in Latin America. What we're also doing now is doing some really interesting research that links it to levels of ineffectiveness of the institutions themselves, as being a variable that which is just as prominent as social inequality in why homicide happens, and also looking at it in relation to corruption. Corruption is a major issue within policing and security in Latin America. So we are looking at whether there's a kind of the factor of corruption has a role to play in the high levels of homicide. That's just like crime patterns, homicide. We then got all this other research going on looking at cocaine production out of Colombia, organized criminal groups in Colombia, Mexico, and other parts of the region. One of my PhD students, he's the deputy chief of police of the Carabineros in Chile, in the city of Santiago, and he's doing his research is a whole evaluation of what is called the Quadrant Plan, which is probably one of the biggest crime prevention strategies ever implemented anywhere in Latin America. Introduced in Chile, has been replicated in other parts of Latin America. And then I have other students who work with me who are looking at the kind of interplay between urban space, architecture, and crime patterns as well. So yeah, it's an interesting place to study crime and policing.
It certainly sounds it. Thank you, Spencer. It's fantastic to hear the impact that you're having in the region, and the fact that you're able to apply those sort of research and analysis methods in the region to make a difference. So it's fantastic to hear that. Thank you. Now, it's evident that your work sits on that line very much between academic research and the practical world of policing. So how do you strike the balance between those two, and why do you think it's important to do both?
I think there's to explain how I strike the balance. I think it's useful for listeners to understand the background that I have prior to academia. My first job was a crime analyst, working in London on a partnership arrangement between a local municipal government agency and the Metropolitan Police. And I worked as an analyst in that role for about 5-6 years. Then I worked in the private sector for about 3-4 years before I came into academia. And even though I've been an academic for 16-18 years now here at UCL, my attitude to things has always been about working with people in the field to help them to improve their effectiveness, rather than me sitting in the ivory towers of academia and writing about what the police should do. So because a lot of my focus has always been going out and about with the police, doing stuff with them, and I get most satisfaction from working with people in the field, whether it be a frontline police officer going out on patrol with them, all the way up to ministers of security, helping them to come up with new national strategies for how they go about reducing crime. That's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, doing that sort of interactive work with people. I think for me, though, as an academic, one of the things I've had to sacrifice are the things that you get points for, the things you predominantly get points for in academia, which is publication output, particularly journal output. And I've never gone into doing any particular piece of work with any police agency with the first thing at the front of my mind thinking, right, the only reason why I'm doing this is to get a paper, get a publication out of my work with them, to get their data, to end up doing some research, tell them what I think they should do, and then scarper off onto the next police agency. My approach has always been the other way around, by saying, right, I'm going into this place first and foremost to help them improve their effectiveness. And if an academic paper comes out of it, well, then great. So I think, so how I've gone about trying to kind of strike that balance is, and how I think I've been successful, I think, with it, is the police I work with, they then see that I'm then different to many other academics that they have worked with. But first and foremost, I am there to help them, work with them, not to go in there as an academic with all my academic theories on what they should be doing with no practical understanding on the challenges they face at the front line. Instead, get in there, experience and understand the challenges they experience at the front line. And if a paper comes out of it, well, great. If it doesn't, so what? That's been kind of my attitude to this, to have, to strike a balance, which I think worked well for me, and I think works well longer term for my university, because that's shown from the amount of income that we get, the amount of impact that we have in the field, and also the publications that do come out of this. If you have that sort of approach.
No, and I agree. I think it's exactly the right approach, and we've seen the success that you've had and the impact that you're making. So you're certainly doing something right. Now we're currently operating in quite unusual circumstances amidst the global pandemic. How have you found the pandemic has affected your work, especially your training?
So because I work in the field a lot, obviously since beginning of March, I haven't been able to do any of that. So it has affected me a lot. I don't think it's harmed things yet, because we're in a different place at the moment. So things like, let me give you an example. We were about to introduce, I was involved in leading the introduction of a hotspot policing program in a city called Florianópolis in the south of Brazil. It was about to be implemented in April. We'd done all the analysis with the police analysts. We had everything set up. pandemic hits, I was in Brazil literally a week before we went into lockdown in the UK, came back early because borders were beginning to close. Now, we haven't renewed that program yet because things aren't back to normal. Patterns on the street in terms of street robbery are not back to normal. So it hasn't had, I think, that harmful effect on the type of work that we do. But what it has allowed me to do is, I mentioned in the previous question you asked about, one thing I've sacrificed is publication output. What it's allowed me to do over the last 8-10 months is get that publication output going. So all these things that I have been doing over the last 2-3 years, where some papers have been put on the back burner or haven't been quite finished, I've been finishing and getting those out the door to be peer reviewed by journals. So I don't think it's particularly harmed me in any way. I've adapted my work because you have that flexibility to adapt things in academia. Ask me that question again this time next year, and it'd be interesting to see if it has had a harmful effect on the business of doing work with police agencies. In terms of teaching, I do a lot of training with police agencies, and all of that really has been put on hold. Some of my colleagues who lecture, I don't do that much lecturing in the department here, lecturing to undergraduate or postgraduate students. I supervise a lot of student research, but I don't do that much lecturing. There's a fundamental difference between lecturing and being able to take a lecture onto a online platform and deliver remotely, deliver online, to say doing a 2-week training course on geographic profiling. When you are standing in front of a group of students lecturing at them for an hour and a half, 2 hours, you are taking what you have done in the classroom to an online format, and it's reasonably straightforward. I wouldn't say it's easy, because many of my colleagues have been challenged by taking their material from a lecture class environment to then deliver through a video conferencing format. To take training to that format can be extremely challenging, particularly when all the training that I do is highly interactive. It involves a two-way discussion. It involves an interplay. It involves people working in groups. It involves people getting together and discussing things. It involves me sitting down with them, going through on a piece of paper, looking at a screen with them, saying, look at it this way, change something that way. How about thinking of it this way? And it's very, very difficult to do that through video conferencing, through something like Zoom or MS Teams. So an analogy I often give to people is think of a professional athlete. So would you expect that professional athlete to continue to be performing at the high level by you coaching them via a Zoom video conference? No, because it involves you being there with them, to have that interchange with them, to see how they are improving their performance and how they're continuing to stay fit, refreshed, and improve the quality of the athlete that they are. And I think that is the key distinction between, say, lecturing and training. It's much more difficult to train and to develop that rapport with people through a video conferencing environment, which you don't necessarily have to do. It's not necessarily a huge requirement to how you deliver a lecture.
No, I absolutely agree, Spencer. You can't replace that interaction and that personal contact and the group work and things like that in an online environment, sadly. So we're hoping that the pandemic restrictions will be lifted soon, and we can all go back to our face-to-face training.
I mean, one thing that we are doing right now is we're planning a pilot with the Brazilian Federal Police on providing some online training in intelligence-led policing. And we've done that. We said to them, they came to us with a whole list of courses if we could design them to deliver them online. I was like, yeah, hold on. Let's just pilot it first of all to see if the means through which it can be delivered works and suits the audience at the actual receiving end. I mean, this includes doing things like exams and some sort of assessment as well. And so what we have designed is some online training, but we are doing it in a manner which gets the recipients of that to recognize all this is going to do essentially is provide you with some foundation to this particular subject matter. To really begin to apply that within your work setting requires a different type of training. And that is often always the training that we've done. You know, I've never been one who seeks to train people by purely turning at the front in a classroom, telling them what they should do. It's very much about working with them to begin to mainstream those activities, the things that we are coaching them about trying to do and improve, getting those adopted into their agency, rather than just telling them what we, it's not about telling them, it's more, coaching is a word I use a lot because it's about coaching them into how they use those things. So we're trying something out with the Brazilian Federal Police. Again, this time next year, ask me that question, how's it gone with the Brazilian Federal Police? And I'll be able to give you an answer on how online training has gone.
We might well do that, Spencer. Now, I was fascinated to watch your recent interview with Profiling Evil, which discussed the use of geographic profiling applied to the Jack the Ripper case. Now, for analysts watching this today, what's the primary difference between geographic profiling and what is regarded as perhaps more traditional spatial analysis?
What do you mean by traditional spatial analysis?
I think sort of what's regarded as sort of the hotspotting and sort of KDE type spatial analysis is sort of regarded as the more traditional type.
Okay, so what geographic profile? I mean, so geographic profiling for me fits in with this kind of whole family of techniques and applications through which we can explore the geographic aspect of crime. We can explore the geographic aspect of crime through how crime concentrates. Crime doesn't happen randomly. It's not equally dispersed. It concentrates. It concentrates into crime hotspots. And so we can map the density of those points to identify where those hotspots are located. Geographic profiling doesn't produce hotspot maps. What it does is it aims to use the locations associated with a connected series of crimes to determine where the offender who's committed these crimes most likely anchors their activities. And I always prefer to, when I talk about geographic profiling and describe it, always prefer to use that word anchor, because people often misunderstand geographic profiling as being a tool that will mark an X on the map of where the offender lives. It doesn't. It's a tool that helps us to identify the likely anchor of where an offender may live, may work, may begin their hunt to find suitable targets or victims. Geographic profiling is very much about using a significant clue that is left behind at the scene of a crime, and that is where the crime took place. What geographic profiling can also do is it can also use other locations associated with that crime. So let's say in the case of a murder, someone's been murdered, but an item of their clothing has been stolen. But then that item of clothing is then found. Where the item of clothing is found could be a clue because it says the offender has been here. Now, offenders don't just go to places randomly. They often go to those places for some reason. So with geographic profiling, what we're then trying to unpick is that spatial decision-making behavior of the offender. Offenders are in places for a particular reason, and we're trying to unpick that and work back from that to help solve criminal cases. So yeah, no, it was great fun doing those. I did 2 Profiling Evil episodes. One where we looked at a number of more modern day cases, and then because it proved so popular with the viewers, we then did this one on Jack the Ripper, because there's a huge amount of fascinating geography associated with Jack the Ripper, and because it was an American show, they're fascinated with Jack the Ripper. You know, he's the most famous serial offender of all time. But, there are many people who have surpassed him in terms of the number of people that they have murdered. But he's still the famous.
No, absolutely. No, I enjoyed both those episodes and encourage our viewers to watch them with great interest. Now, that leads us very nicely onto your widely anticipated new book, Understanding Crime. What can you tell us about it, and how is it different to others on the market which consider the spatial characteristics of crime?
2005, me and Jerry Ratcliffe, produced this, okay? And it was actually produced in a series of books for the publisher Wiley on mastering GIS. I think they produced about 5 on different types of applications. We did the one on GIS and crime mapping. This book outsold all the other books in the series like 4 or 5 times over. And every single year since 2005, me and Jerry have been approached to produce a second edition of it. And a number of reasons I won't go into. Me and Jerry haven't fallen out, by the way. It wasn't because of that. Me and Jerry decided, no, we didn't want to do a second edition. About 2-3 years ago, I then got approached by Esri Press to write a book. And I thought that where there was a gap in the market, there was no book out there that really got into helping analysts in being better at doing geographic analysis. There's some good books out there, but there's not books that necessarily get you into the techniques to explain how these techniques work and why they are useful. What I wanted to avoid as well, I didn't want this book. I mean, it's produced by Esri Press, but I said to them, I don't want this to be an ArcGIS book. Mm-hmm. I don't want it to be full of exercises, press this button, do this, do that. This book is generic, is useful to anybody, regardless of the GIS they're using. And I made that clear to Esri when we decided to write this book. And I'm holding it up because this is only one of like 6 copies in the world at the moment. This is not published until middle of January, and I got sent a few pre-order copies. So I decided to write a book then, which got into the detail of the analytical techniques. It's got, 10 chapters to it. Each chapter focuses on a particular kind of area of geographic analysis. There's a whole chapter on hotspot analysis, which we've been discussing. There's a whole chapter on geographic profiling. The only book that's really available on geographic profiling is Kim Rosmo's book from 2000, okay? Fantastic book. This is the Bible on geographic profiling. But there's nothing out there since that has been written that kind of brings it more to be more user-friendly to analysts as an entry to geographic profiling and with more recent cases. There's a whole chapter in this book on geographic profiling that's designed to raise awareness to analysts on how you can consider the geographic profiling principles within the investigative work that you do. There's chapters in here as well on crime risk analysis, so how you go about looking at things, associated with risk. There's a whole chapter. The first chapter is on kind of introducing people to the theories. It's called Understanding Crime, how you understand the patterns that you see as you draw from the theories. There's a whole stuff on, there's a chapter on the spatial temporal analysis. We have a chapter on, the one that took me the longest time to write was the chapter on analyzing spatial regression. Applying spatial regression, rather, because spatial regression is probably one of the most underused geographic analysis techniques out there. And what spatial regression allows us to do is look at the patterns of crime that we see, the dots on the map, the hotspots that we see, and say, right, what is this related to? Is this related to the distribution of liquor stores? Is this related to the distribution of schools and colleges? Is this related at all to the distribution of demographic factors such as unemployment, poverty, the age dynamics of a population? Spatial regression is a really difficult subject for analysts to get into, and there's nothing on my bookshelves here that really helps analysts until I spent 2 months writing that chapter and trying to break it down, not dumb it down, but break it down in a manner that I hope analysts can feel as though they can now find that applying spatial regression techniques is now more accessible to them because they understand how to do it. And there's a lot of terminology used in these things as well. So what the hell does heteroscedasticity mean? And these sort of things are often thrown out of these other books that I have on here, which only end up confusing people as to, which then, because it confuses them, because they're not clear on what those terms are, it then means, I'm not going to look at that technique. I don't quite understand it. That is why I've written this book, because it explains those sorts of things in a manner that makes it more palatable, more digestible, more understandable.
Absolutely. It sounds like an excellent publication, which will be valuable and accessible to both new and experienced analysts. Now, for those watching who are interested in buying it, where can they buy it? And how soon did you say it will be available? So
I think from the top of my head, I think it's 19th of January. The hard copy is available from any decent online bookstore. Amazon, Waterstones, Barnes & Noble in the States, W.H. Smith's in the UK. I know it's listed on there now. So you can get it anywhere online. I think even from Esri Press Direct as well. It's also available in ebook format, which I think is available now. I think you can possibly go to Amazon or another online bookseller and get an ebook version of it if you prefer that sort of format. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Now, you've obviously travelled and worked with a lot of analysts and agencies from different countries and across different cultures. One thing that I'd be interested to know, based on your personal experiences, what do you find are the common challenges that analysts face around the world? There's a few. Let me think. I'm trying to limit those to the top three. I think one is ensuring that their bosses know what they do. Mm-hmm. This is the same, I think, today, or not that dissimilar today to what it was, say, 25 years ago when I was an analyst, because my boss wasn't that particularly analytically minded, knew a bit about what I did, but didn't really know what I could do or what I was capable of. And I think one of my best bosses in my early days was someone who didn't necessarily always understood what it was that I could do, but would always push me and challenge me by saying, right, okay, that's good, but can you do something that is in any way slightly better? Or what you think we should be doing. So they often would challenge me in that regard. So I think if your boss doesn't quite know what you do, rather than just giving them what they've asked for, give them that little extra thing that you are capable of doing and you think that may be more valuable. So rather than just providing them with a statistic on something, put something else behind it. Give them something which you think that may be more valuable. That then comes to my second theme. The second kind of key common challenge I find is that too many analysts still today, they may have the job title of analyst, but they're simply data clerks. The role of analysis is to answer the why question. For me, I've always felt that is, a key thing is to be able to not just describe where, when, how, what, etc. It's to answer that why question. Analysis is fundamentally about understanding. This is why I called this book Understanding Crime. It's about trying to understand the things that you're looking at, rather than looking at a pattern and just describing it. Well, we've got a hotspot in our city centre on a Friday and Saturday night when the pubs and nightclubs are open. It's like, well, that's a useful description, but take it the next stage further by explaining, well, why is it then? Is it associated with all the bars and nightclubs, or is it associated with maybe only 2 or 3 out of the 20 or 30 that are in that place? Try to answer that why question. Give them that thing that's a little bit extra beyond the descriptive. So I think a challenge that analysts, rather than thinking of your job as an analyst as a data clerk only providing statistics, I think a question that analysts should always challenge themselves about is, am I answering the why question? Am I providing something which is going to influence the type of intervention that we can then put in place to kind of counter this type of criminal behavior. Things that I think are less of a problem are data. I mean, look, I started on this 25 years ago when the data was shocking. It was terrible. But we still did things with that data back then. By using the data, we identified where the errors and flaws were within that data to other people who then went about correcting them because they didn't know that those flaws and gaps were there. So I don't think data is so much of a problem. What I do think is a problem, though, is the challenge is the volume of that data. And I think that this requires analysts to begin to think of using other techniques, to continually refresh and be aware of techniques that can help them manage data or look at data slightly differently. Let me just give you one example of this. So, I was this about 18 months ago, I was with a group of about 50 analysts from the Metropolitan Police at a seminar here in London. And I was asked to speak about a technique called crime script analysis. My first question to the analysts, 50 of them there, many of them worked for the Met Police for 20 years. I said, how many of you are working on organized crime at the moment? Half of the hands went up in the room. Of those of you who have been here for 10 years, how many of you think that crime has become more complex? Then all the hands for people who have been there for 10 or more years were up, hands up. Yeah, crime is much more complex than it was in the 90s in terms of analyzing crime. Put your hands up if you've ever applied a technique called crime script analysis. No hands went up. And that for me was an illustration of in one agency, but replicated in many other parts of the world where analysts themselves are not updating themselves on techniques that they could use that are suitable to the challenges that they face now. I'm not going to get into the details of what crime script analysis is. If you're interested, search it online and you'll see many, many examples of crime script analysis and how it's used for helping you to better understand complex criminal activity.
I couldn't agree more. I've used it myself at Transport for London. You'll be glad to hear. Thank you for that, Spencer. And lastly, if you could give one piece of advice to analysts who are considering a career in crime analysis, what would you say?
Ooh. Don't go in it for the money. You're not going to be a millionaire by being a crime analyst, but what you are going to get, so I'm going to give advice in a minute. I think, one of the things that I think any analyst will say is that they get a huge satisfaction from what they do. And going back to a point I made earlier, the more inquisitive you are as an analyst, the more you challenge yourselves, or you get the people around you to challenge you, the more interesting the analysis that you'll produce and the greater satisfaction you'll get from that. Being a data clerk producing statistics can get bloody boring, right? Being doing proper analysis and finding out stuff is really interesting. So one piece of advice to analysts: don't just do what you think you're capable of doing. Do the next best thing. Okay? Always think of that, do the next best thing. So if whatever piece of work you're doing right at this moment, next week, week after, think about, right, how can I make this better than what I did before? You can then apply that a little bit further, because I find that one thing that holds back analysts is a lack of career progression. Okay, there's not many tiers of analysis within even large police agencies. Okay, so rather than thinking that your career is always only going to be as an analyst, think of your career as being someone working in whatever agency you're in: policing, public safety, whether it be in local government, regional, federal government, local policing, federal policing. Think that as an analyst, It's providing you with a fantastic foundation to be more data-driven, to go about things in a more intelligence-led manner. It's going to allow you to be a better problem solver. It's going to allow you to hopefully be more, draw from the evidence that's out there, which are key ingredients for modern day police officers, modern day professionals working in public safety. I am looking forward to the day when I shake the hands of a police chief who has previously worked with me as an analyst, because I think that the career, it's a fantastic career to be involved in, working in policing, working in public safety, dealing with crime. As I said at the beginning, we don't go into this for the money. We go into it because we think that we can do something which will in some way better our society. If you are an analyst, don't think of always only ever being an analyst. Think about when you hit the ceiling of what you can do as an analyst. Think about, what can I now do as someone then is a user of this analysis stuff, where I'm implementing stuff in the field, and how I can then come to be the chief of police, the minister of security.
That's a fantastic aspiration to have. And I would like to see that day too, very much. Spencer, it's been fascinating listening to you today. I could talk to you all day, and I honestly can't wait to receive my copy of your book. The link and details for Spencer's book, Understanding Crime, are in the description below. Spencer, thank you again for spending time with us today. We hope you come back and join us again sometime soon. And in the meantime, we look forward to your book being released.
My pleasure, Rachel. And I wish everybody a much more enjoyable 2021 than 2020 has been.
I couldn't agree more. That's Dr. Spencer Chainey, educator, author, and one of the world's leading minds in the application of research in policing and public safety. Back over to you, Manny.
What a great interview. Check the description below, where you'll find a link to order your copy of Dr. Spencer Chainey's new book, Understanding Crime, Analyzing the Geography of Crime, along with links to other great crime analysis resources. If you found value in this video, smash that like, click subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell so you don't miss any of our episodes. See you next time.